Hey there, Aletheia Church. Hope that you guys are doing well. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to recap my sermon from Sunday that I entitled Prophecy in Tongues for you guys. For those of you guys that weren't there, you missed out, but we talked about how we've been talking for several weeks now about spiritual gifts and what it looks like to use those in the context of the local church. And we said that the text we were looking here at 1 Corinthians chapter 14 was supposed to be understood in light of what Pastor Daniel had talked about in chapter 13 on love and loving one another well. And, what we see here is that Paul basically says, hey, I understand that there's an argument going on inside of this church where people are fighting amongst themselves over whether they have the gift of tongues or not and wanting to use that. And he basically just says that spiritual gifts are not supposed to be thought of in a selfish manner, and that ultimately we see that the primary use of those gifts is to be able to serve others. And so he says that they should desire the gift of prophecy instead, because it builds up the mind and edifies one another. And we kind of said that there were a number of different ways to look at that and understand that, but that basically if we couldn't understand a language, that we should really understand that tongues are only then building us up in a single way instead of for the entire body. And so he ultimately says that there ends up being limitations of the tongues, and that prophecy, however, builds up, encourages, and consoles. And so, really we said then that there was a way to kind of expand upon this or look at this in a much deeper way, which is that it's okay to desire gifts, but that we should see the primary use of them as being an act of service. And so he even goes so far as to say that if one should have a tongue, he should pray that he has an interpretation so that he can understand it. And so I shared my story from Colombia this past week and how important it was to have an interpreter with that guy that had shared with me, and how when there was an interpreter, there was understanding and rejoicing, but without one, it created issues. And so lastly, he finishes up this section just telling us that ultimately, if we elevate tongues to a higher standard or a higher status, that we end up running the risk of confusing unbelievers. And we talked about that for a while, and hopefully you guys will talk about that in your groups as well. But here's the challenge I want you guys to consider in group tonight and talk about: is my life, or is your life, and the seeking of gifts for the church being done in such a way to encourage others and serve others, or is it being done for selfish motivation or gain? And if so, just talk about why that might be problematic and what God's design is for you. Hope you guys have a great week. Enjoy your time in gospel community. Have a great week. Go and be the church.